"Please don't lift my skirt," she whispered. But the millionaire did, and froze. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m., piercing the silence of a cramped apartment tucked inside an aging complex in South San Francisco. Grace Alvarez opened her eyes, not because she had rested enough, but because tiredness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Beside her, her younger sister Sophia slept soundly, her youthful face twitching slightly at the sound, before drifting back into dreams. Grace silenced the alarm, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor, walking toward the small kitchen where the kettle was already prepped. She didn't need to look. She knew where everything was: the cheap instant coffee, the milk bottle prepared for their mother in the fridge. Every morning started the same, with the precision of a rhythm life had forced her to memorize. Her mother, Lucia, had been paralyzed on one side after a stroke 2 years ago. Every medical bill, every living expense, Sophia's school fees, everything depended on the modest salary Grace earned from what she often called her invisible job: a custodial staff member at Whitmore Innovations, a massive tech firm downtown. By 6 a.m., Grace stepped out of the apartment in her plain gray uniform, tool bag in hand. The city of San Francisco was still half asleep, skyscrapers stretching quietly into the fog. She boarded the early bus, sitting alone among empty seats, eyes staring blankly out the window as cold, indifferent streets passed by. Arriving at Whitmore Innovations headquarters, she didn't need to flash a badge. The security guards knew her face. She greeted them with a soft nod and disappeared into the service elevator, the one no one in the company ever really noticed. Bathrooms, meeting rooms, the long corridors of the 12th floor, they were her private kingdom between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. She worked with quiet precision, desks spotless, floors dry, windows streak-free. Grace knew her job wasn't to be seen, it was to never be complained about. Some days she wondered, had anyone ever noticed the person cleaning behind those polished glass doors? Did anyone in this building even know her name? Sometimes her eyes lingered on a corner of the floor, the office behind a mirrored glass wall. It belonged to Daniel Whitmore, CEO of the entire corporation. She had never spoken to him. All she knew was that he came in early, worked long hours, and had eyes like steel in every meeting. But occasionally, through the tinted glass, she would catch a glimpse of him staring out at the city, lost in thought, alone in a way that felt strangely familiar. Grace didn't know why she noticed. Maybe because in a world full of polish and power, he too seemed like someone hiding things no one was meant to see. Her life continued, quiet, consistent, like the silent sweep of glass each morning that no one heard. But she didn't know that, just a few days later, one small moment would change her world completely. The 12th floor in the early morning was always unusually quiet. Not because it was empty, but because it was the one time people like Grace could do their work without being seen. She liked that hour, when the only sounds were her scrub brush against the tile and soft music leaking from her old earbuds. That morning was no different. Grace was cleaning the tall glass panels of the central conference room, a space with a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay. The floor-to-ceiling windows were always the hardest, requiring her to use the foldable ladder. She had done this 100 times before, but that day, for some reason, her footing shifted as she reached the top step. With her left hand holding the cloth and her right gripping the frame, she reached upward to wipe a smudge near the top. Then, her hand slipped. In a blink, she lost balance, her body pitching forward. There was a faint thud, not loud enough to cause a scene, but just enough for Daniel Whitmore, working in his private office nearby, to lift his head. She didn't hit the ground. Her uniform skirt caught on one of the ladder's hinges, suspending her awkwardly in midair. The fabric tore from her knee up to nearly her hip. One bare leg was exposed, along with a series of strange, rough, haunting scars. Grace froze. Her eyes widened with panic, her cheeks flushed. Hearing a door open, she knew who was approaching. Her voice trembled. "Please, don't look. Please don't lift my skirt. I'm begging you." Daniel halted, stunned by the desperation in her voice. He didn't understand what had happened, only that this woman, the custodian he'd barely noticed, was shaking in fear, not from the fall, but from something far deeper. He spoke gently. "Are you hurt? Let me help. No, please, please don't touch me. But he had already seen a glimpse of a truth Grace had worked for years to conceal. Those scars, they weren't from accidents or surgery. They had shape, intent, as if someone had carved them into her skin to mark her as their own. Daniel couldn't look away, not out of curiosity, but horror. No decent human could have done this to someone, and the woman in front of him, the one who rose at dawn to clean offices for strangers, had survived it. Grace saw his eyes fall on the scars and she couldn't bear it. Her hands flew to cover her skirt, her lips quivering. Please don't say anything. Don't tell anyone. Please. Daniel nodded softly. He removed his suit jacket and gently draped it over her. Here, cover yourself. She accepted it, hands trembling. Daniel knelt and offered his hand. Let me help you up. This time she didn't refuse. After that day's accident, Daniel never looked at Grace the same way again. Not because she had fallen from a ladder, but because of what had been exposed beneath that uniform. Not just the scars, but the fear in her eyes. Grace returned to work the very next day, as if nothing had happened. Her skirt was neatly mended, the jacket returned to the front desk. No thank you, no explanation. Daniel understood. It was her way of keeping distance, but he couldn't forget. On Wednesday morning, as he stepped off the elevator onto the 12th floor, Daniel paused near the refreshment counter. Grace was wiping down a nearby surface. Her head was low, avoiding eye contact. "Ms. Grace," he called gently. She froze. It was the first time he had said her name. "Would you mind stopping for a moment?" Grace looked up, slightly startled, but approached. Daniel held out a hot paper cup of coffee. "It's just, thank you for coming back. I was worried you might not." She accepted the cup with hesitant hands, eyeing him like she was trying to figure out what he wanted. After a moment, she softly said, "Thanks, but I didn't really have a choice. My family needs this job." Daniel nodded. He hesitated, then asked, the question that had haunted him for 3 days. "Those scars, were they from an accident?" Grace stood still. 1 beat. 2. Her brown eyes shimmered with something unnamed. Part anger, part fear, part exhaustion. "No," she said quietly. "Not an accident." Silence. Daniel didn't interrupt. He waited. "It was someone I used to live with," she finally said. "He was my boyfriend, Marcus Vega." Her voice faltered as she said the name. "He hit me, cut me, said the marks were so I'd never forget who I belonged to." Daniel's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He didn't know how to react. Anger? Pity? He just felt a furious helplessness and an unshakable respect for the woman in front of him. "And then?" he asked. My sister Sophia found out. She was only 15. She pulled me out of that apartment on a rainy night. We moved into the place we're in now. I never went back." Daniel looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. But she also wasn't standing as tall as usual. There was an invisible crack in her stance, and he saw it. "You survived," he said quietly, "and you kept going. I don't know many people who could do that." Grace gave a faint smile, a joyless one. "I didn't survive to be admired, Mr. Whitmore. I survived because I didn't have any other choice." Daniel nodded slowly. "What about now? Do you still think you have no choice?" Grace looked up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. Her voice was calm but firm. "You're the CEO. I mop the floors. Our worlds don't intersect. We don't talk. We're not supposed to be close. And you don't owe me anything just because you saw what you did." Daniel was silent. "But thank you for the jacket, and for not telling anyone." Then she walked away, leaving Daniel alone with his slowly cooling coffee and a single question echoing in his mind. How does someone carry so many scars and still stand up straight every day? After that conversation, something shifted, not in a way that could be easily described, but there was now a space between them that no longer belonged to boss and custodian, but to two people who had seen the real wounds in each other. Daniel started a new habit. Every morning, instead of going straight to his office, He stopped by the 12th floor with 2 cups of coffee. One for him, one for Grace. She never refused it, though she never rushed toward it either. They drank in silence, usually just a few minutes before returning to their roles. But in those minutes, silence wasn't distance anymore. It was presence. One morning, as they stood leaning on the balcony railing overlooking the city, Daniel asked, "You once said you wanted to be a teacher, right?" Grace looked mildly surprised but nodded. "I like teaching. When we were little, I used to play school with my sister." "Why did you give it up?" She paused and then answered, "Life. My mom got sick. My dad walked out. Someone had to work." Daniel said nothing. He understood what it meant to carry responsibility too early. Everyone had a moment their childhood ended. For Grace, it seemed it was at 17. She glanced at him, eyes glimmering with a quiet sadness. "What about you? Ever wanted to do something else besides being a CEO?" Daniel chuckled softly without joy. "I don't know. I was groomed for it since I could talk. Harvard, corporate training, image control. No one's ever asked what I wanted. If you could choose differently, what would it be?" He thought for a long moment. "Maybe an architect. I like building, creating spaces people can live in, exist in." Grace nodded. "There are too many people living in things they never chose." Daniel looked at her. "Like you." "Like a lot of people. I'm just one of them." A breeze passed gently. The city below was waking up. Work hour was approaching. Daniel said quietly, "If you still want to study, I could help." Grace shook her head instantly. "I don't take handouts. I don't want to owe anyone." "It's not charity," he replied. "It's an investment in someone who deserves it." She pressed her lips together, saying nothing more. But that morning, for the first time, she didn't walk away right after the coffee. She stayed a little longer beside him, not as employee and employer, but as two people, standing on the edge of something they didn't yet have a name for. That day, when she finished work, he waited for her in the lobby and offered to take her home. On the way, he asked, "Grace, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Grace froze. "Dinner?" "Not at home," Daniel quickly explained. "At a restaurant, like two friends trying to get to know each other better." Grace felt both excited and afraid. "Daniel, that's not appropriate. I'm your employee." "Just for 3 hours," Daniel said. "From 6 to 9 in the evening, you're not my employee. You're Grace, I'm Daniel. And we're two people who've shared important conversations that I want to continue." Grace looked at him for a long time. In his gray eyes, there was sincerity and also a fragility he tried to hide. "What kind of restaurant?" she asked, as if secretly agreeing. "I know a small place in the Mission District. Family-style food, quiet atmosphere, no pressure at all." "All right," Grace replied after a brief hesitation. "But I'll wear my own clothes and go home by public transportation." "Deal," Daniel said immediately. "I'll pick you up at 6. That afternoon, Grace stood in front of her small wardrobe, puzzling over something she hadn't thought about in years. What to wear for an evening out. It wasn't exactly a date, yet the way he had looked at her lately made her heartbeat race, unwillingly so. Sophia, her younger sister, sat on the bed, grinning mischievously. "Who is it?" "My boss," Grace replied, trying on a navy blue blouse she'd bought long ago, but rarely worn. "Bosses don't invite employees to dinner. Unless," Sophia trailed off suggestively, "unless it's something more." "There's nothing," Grace protested, but her reflection in the mirror seemed to disagree. "Just friends." "Friends?" Sophia sat up straight. 2 years working for him, and you've never referred to him as anything but Mr. Whitmore. Now you're as nervous as a teenager getting ready for her first date." Grace sat down beside her. "Sophia, this is complicated. He comes from a completely different world. This friendship, it probably won't go anywhere." "Maybe," Sophia agreed, "but maybe not. And after everything you've been through, you deserve a chance to find out." Right at 6, Daniel showed up in a car far more modest than his usual BMW, a plain Nissan that wouldn't draw attention in Grace's neighborhood. When she stepped out, he couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Grace wore a navy blue blouse, dark jeans, and elegant flats. Her hair, usually tied back, fell in soft waves over her shoulders tonight. She wore almost no makeup, but her natural grace made her look entirely different, from her workday self. "You look beautiful," Daniel said sincerely. Grace blushed slightly. "Thank you. You look different today, too." Daniel wore jeans and a simple shirt, looking younger and far more approachable without his usual business suit. The restaurant Daniel had chosen was small and cozy, with rustic wooden tables and a homey feel. The food was traditional Mexican, far from the elegant banquets he usually attended. "How did you find this place?" Grace asked. "When I was a kid, my nanny used to bring me here. After my parents divorced when I was 12, she, a younger version of Anna, took care of me. This was our special place." Grace looked at him with new eyes. "I didn't know your parents were divorced. They split when I was 12. My father raised me because he had the means, but honestly, Anna did more of a mother's job than my own mother did at that time." "And your mother, she's in Paris now?" "We only talk at Christmas and on birthdays." Daniel took a sip of water. "See, I'm no different from you. I have a complicated family too." Over dinner, they talked about everything. Daniel told her about his lonely childhood in a mansion far too big, the pressure to follow in his father's footsteps, and how he lost part of himself while building his career. Grace spoke about growing up in East Oakland, her father leaving when her family needed him most, and the jobs she'd worked before arriving at the Whitmore estate. Some humiliating, but necessary. "You know what surprises me most about you?" Daniel asked as they shared a plate of flan for dessert. "What?" "That after everything you've been through, you can still see the good in people. You still have hope." Grace smiled faintly. "And you know what surprises me most about you? That behind all your success and the appearance of a businessman, you're more human than you want others to see, and you're even more afraid of emotional connection than I am." Daniel was silent, then admitted, "You're right. In fact, this dinner, this conversation, this is the most emotional intimacy I've had in years." "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," Daniel said honestly, "but it's also the realest thing I've felt in a long time." When the evening ended, Daniel took Grace to the BART station as promised. Before she left, he gently stopped her. "Grace, can we do this again? Dinner, talking, just Daniel and Grace for a few hours?" Grace saw the same fragility in his eyes she had sensed all evening. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." As Grace walked into the station, Daniel watched until her figure blended into the crowd, knowing that tonight had changed everything. They were no longer just boss and employee. They had crossed into uncharted territory, and neither of them knew what the future would bring. More and more, Victoria Whitmore noticed that something was changing in her son. Daniel still arrived at the company on time, still handled his work with the usual precision, but she was observant enough to know part of his mind was elsewhere. He left meetings earlier, smiled for no apparent reason, and most notably, kept stopping by the 12th floor, where only internal staff worked. One late afternoon, she called him into her private office, the same room where every major Whitmore family decision had been made. "Daniel," she said, her tone calm but deliberate, "we need to talk." He sat down, posture straight, eyes, as always, calm but guarded. "About Grace Alvarez." Daniel paused slightly, then nodded. "I figured you knew." "Of course I know. Did you think anything happening in this company would escape me?" The air thickened. "Mother," Daniel began slowly, "I understand you're concerned, but—" "Concerned?" Victoria cut in. "You're the CEO of one of the nation's largest tech firms. You have a reputation, an image to uphold, and you're involved with a cleaning staff member?" The words were sharp as a blade. Daniel's fist clenched. "You don't know anything about her." "I don't need to. She doesn't belong in this world, Daniel. She doesn't understand how our society functions, doesn't know how to behave at public events, lacks background. She has character, strength, and more dignity than half the people you've dragged me to cocktail parties with." Victoria sighed, not from exhaustion but disappointment. Pity is not love, and status isn't worth. Silence. "You really think this could go somewhere?" she asked, looking at him like he was a boy chasing childish fantasies. Daniel raised his head. "I don't know, but I want to find out." Victoria stood, walking to the window. The late day light traced her back, proud, solitary. "If you take this too far, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" No, she turned, her eyes steady. I'm protecting you from a choice you'll regret. Daniel stood as well, composed. Then maybe it's time I learned to live with my own regrets. And with that, he left the room, leaving his mother in the silence of those elegant wooden walls, where for the first time in years she realized her son was no longer listening. Daniel didn't reach out to Grace for 2 days after speaking with his mother. Not because he regretted anything, but because for the first time in his life, he was choosing someone not approved by legacy, wealth, or pedigree, but by his heart. And that terrified him more than he was willing to admit. To accept that what he felt was no longer sympathy, but something deeper, something almost necessary. On Saturday morning, with the office nearly empty, he sent her a short message from the internal system. If you don't mind, I'd like to take you out for breakfast. Not about work, just 2 people. Grace read the message while wiping windows on the 9th floor. She paused for quite a while, then replied with a single line, "Only breakfast, and you're not allowed to pick a fancy place?" They met at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet corner of the Mission District. No one there knew who they were. There were no titles, no roles. Daniel arrived first. He wore a simple shirt, no tie. When Grace walked in, wearing a beige sweater and worn jeans, he stood out of habit, a rare act of formality. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I was nearby," she replied, half joking. They ordered toast, black coffee, and orange juice. A simple breakfast. The conversation was not. "I know," Daniel began, "that whatever this is, it won't be easy, but I can't pretend I don't feel something." Grace looked him in the eye. "Because you feel sorry for me?" "No," he shook his head. "Because you're strong and real. You're the first thing in years that's made me want to slow down and listen." She said nothing. "I'm not asking anything from you," Daniel continued. "Just, if you'll let me, I'd like to get to know you. Not as boss and employee, as 2 people. For real." Grace sat still. Her heart thudded hard. Not with excitement, but fear. Fear of opening up. Fear of being hurt again. "You've seen my scars," she said softly. "But what you don't know is, some things inside my head hurt worse." "Then let them stay there," Daniel replied. "I'm not here to fix you. I just want to be near you." A few seconds passed before she sighed and gave a small smile. "You talk a lot. You know that?" "I have to. If I don't say it now, I won't have the courage to later." Grace rested her chin on her hand. "Do you think we're stepping into something that'll end up hurting both of us?" Daniel nodded. "I do. But maybe some pain is worth it." As they left the cafe, he opened the car door for her. The silence inside wasn't awkward, it was warm. Before she stepped out, Daniel gently held her wrist. "Grace." "Yes?" "You're the bravest person I've ever met." She froze, looked at him, her eyes a little wet, but not with sadness. "And you're the first person who hasn't looked at me like a walking scar." The door shut softly behind her. They both knew. They had just crossed a line they couldn't come back from. Things were starting to settle. Morning coffees, silent glances, short conversations that somehow made entire days feel warmer. Grace was growing used to Daniel's presence, not as a CEO, but as a quiet, steady companion. Until one afternoon, just as she finished her shift, a man in a gray suit approached her in the company parking lot. "You're Grace Alvarez?" he asked, his voice polite, yet chillingly cold. She nodded cautiously. "I've been asked to speak on behalf of Mrs. Victoria Whitmore. She believes there's something you should see." He handed her an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a copy of Marcus Vega's early release approval. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Less than 3 weeks, and he's petitioning to relocate to San Francisco. She froze. Her fingers crushed the paper involuntarily. "Mrs. Whitmore suggests you reconsider your position. You wouldn't want Mr. Daniel caught up in your past, would you?" The man walked away, leaving Grace trembling in the gray afternoon light. With fear, she thought she had buried rising all over again. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the tiny living room, watching her sister Sophia study, her chest tight, breath short. She knew Victoria was trying to force her out, but the real fear wasn't the mother, it was Marcus. He had sworn to reclaim what was his when arrested. If he found her, if he learned who Daniel was, there would be consequences. The next morning, she called Daniel. "I'm not coming into work today," she said quietly over the phone. "Are you okay?" "No, but I want to meet you. Usual place, 7. At their familiar cafe, Grace told him everything, every detail. She hid nothing. Daniel didn't say a word the whole time she spoke. He just sat there looking at her, unblinking. "I don't want you dragged into this," she said, hands trembling around her coffee cup. "You think I'd walk away because of it?" he asked. "No, I'm afraid you'll get hurt, and I couldn't live with that if it was because of me." Daniel reached for her hand. "Grace, I don't care who Marcus is. I care about you. And if he comes back, I won't let you face him alone. If this leaks, your name, your reputation, reputations can be rebuilt. But you're irreplaceable." She looked at him, stunned. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. 2 days later, Daniel took her somewhere, a private security firm. He had arranged discreet protection around Grace's building and filed legal alerts to prevent Marcus from coming near her. "I don't want you living in fear another day," he said as they left the office. "Your past doesn't get to own you." Grace took his hand, gripping tightly. "You're the only good thing in my life I'm not afraid of." Grace had never stepped into a space like this. The hotel hosting that year's charity gala sat atop one of San Francisco's tallest buildings. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, a live symphony orchestra. Everything was dazzling to the point of overwhelming. Daniel was a guest of honor, and this time, he didn't come alone. Grace wore a deep navy dress, simple, chosen by Daniel's personal stylist. It wasn't flashy or revealing, but elegant and perfectly tailored. Her hair was pulled back, revealing soft features that were usually hidden beneath fatigue and a gray uniform. As they entered the grand ballroom, every eye turned toward them. No one knew who Grace was, and that unsettled them. Victoria Whitmore was mid-conversation with a group of investors when she caught sight of her son entering. Her face stiffened for a moment as she saw the woman beside him, a look of someone whose warning had been ignored. Several society women whispered, quick glances, curious, judgmental. "Who is she? Doesn't look like our crowd. She looks like a staff member." Grace heard every word. They didn't have to speak loudly. Her ears were used to catching what people tried to hide. She instinctively stepped back, but Daniel gently held her hand. "Look at me," he whispered. "Don't look at them." She looked at him, a quiet moment in the middle of chaos. "I'm proud to have you with me," Daniel said. "If anyone has a problem, it's their problem, not ours." She nodded and kept walking. Throughout the evening, Daniel never left Grace's side. He introduced her to people who were genuinely kind, those who looked at her with respect. But not everyone was so gracious. Eventually, Victoria approached them. "Hello, Grace," she said, a thin smile on her lips. "I'm surprised to see you here." Grace didn't answer. She simply nodded politely. Daniel stepped in. "I invited her, and you know why." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. "Then let's see how far you can take her." That night on the drive home, Grace whispered, "I've never been somewhere that felt so foreign. I could barely breathe." Daniel took her hand. "I know, but you walked through it, on your own feet." Grace turned to him, her eyes lit with something different. "Where do you think this is going?" Daniel looked at her steady. "I don't know, but I know this. I don't want to go anywhere if it's not with you." Monday morning, Grace was driving Sophia to school when her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. "Grace!" A deep, familiar voice sent ice through her veins. "Still recognize my voice?" "Marcus." She slammed the brakes, making Sophia lurch forward. "I'm out," he said. "And you know I keep my promises. I'll take back what's mine." "Don't call me again," she replied, voice trembling. "You can run, but you can't hide forever, Grace." The call ended. Sophia looked worried. "What's wrong?" Grace didn't answer. Her hands clenched the steering wheel. She wasn't the same fragile girl from 4 years ago. But she knew one thing. Marcus didn't make empty threats. Grace filed a police report. Daniel's security team increased surveillance. But none of it could quiet the tremble in her hands every time the phone rang. She kept checking windows, listening for footsteps, waiting for the past to break through her locked doors. One night, returning from work, she found an envelope wedged in her doorframe. Inside was a photo of her and Daniel at the gala, with a scribbled note. "He looks rich. Think he'd die for you?" She collapsed onto the floor, blood running cold. The next morning, Grace went to Daniel's office. He was mid-meeting. She knocked and said only one thing. "I need to talk, now." Once inside his private room, she showed him the photo. Daniel stared, his expression calm, but his knuckles whitened from the pressure. "I can't drag you into this," Grace said, choking back tears. "We need to stop." "Ed, no," Daniel said instantly. "Absolutely not. You don't Grace," he interrupted, locking eyes with her, no softness left. "I understand perfectly, but if you think letting me go is how you protect me, you're wrong. I don't need protection. I need you to stay." She burst into tears. "I'm scared. I've never been this scared." "And you think I'm not?" He stepped forward, pulling her into his arms. "But I'd rather be afraid with you than be safe without you." The next day, police arrested Marcus lurking near Grace's building. He carried a knife and wiretap gear. He was charged with violating parole and intent to harm. Grace was safe, but her body still trembled. That evening, Daniel came to her apartment. No coffee, no flowers, just a blank notebook and a pen. "What's this?" she asked. "We start over," he said. "From page 1. He doesn't get to write this story anymore." "You do." "So do I." Grace opened to the first page. He had already written one line. Chapter 1, No More Fear. She looked at him, eyes still red but lips smiling. Then, "Let's keep writing." 6 months later, Grace woke up in her new room, still amazed by the turn her life had taken. She no longer lived in the cramped rooftop space. Daniel had helped her family move into a spacious, safer apartment, close to the hospital where her mother was being treated. Sophia had begun studying medicine on a scholarship, thanks to her outstanding academic achievements. Therapy with Dr. Vega had helped Grace heal from the past and given her the tools to face the future. With Daniel's support, Grace returned to school to become a teacher, her childhood dream. She worked part-time as a teaching assistant at an elementary school, using her life experience to form a special connection with children from disadvantaged backgrounds. That morning, she went to the estate for Sunday breakfast with Daniel and Victoria Whitmore. The relationship between the two women had changed after Grace had lovingly cared for her during an illness. "Good morning, my dear Grace," Victoria smiled. "Good morning, ma'am. How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thanks to you." Daniel walked in and kissed Grace gently on the cheek. "Good morning, my love." Grace noticed an approving look from his mother. After breakfast, Daniel stood up. "There's something I want to talk to you about." He took her hand. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've taught me the meaning of true love and made me a better man." He knelt down, opening a small velvet box. "Grace Alvarez, will you marry me?" Grace froze, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, kissed her, and Victoria clapped through her own tears. "Welcome officially to the family." Triggy. A year later, the wedding was perfect. Elegant but unpretentious, blending the traditions of Daniel's family with the simplicity that Grace valued. Sophia was the bridesmaid, and Grace's mother cried throughout the ceremony. No one called them a perfect couple. They didn't need to be. All they needed was this: to wake up without fear, to fall asleep without loneliness, and to write every new chapter together by their own hands. That night, as Grace placed the final flower on her classroom desk, a soft breeze came through the open window. No fear, no shadows, just the quiet sound of new beginnings.